Howdy folks, just before we jump into this video, I do want to announce that in October of this year, we will be launching the Rough and Ready's Hell Comes Home Frontier over on my mini factory. There will be 20 plus miniatures that bring the Rough and Ready's, whom I have been writing about now for 2 years, onto the tabletop. You'll be able to get all the characters, you'll be able to get a court warband to fight them with. It's going to be super fun. I can't wait for you to see these sculpts. We've managed to get together Taylor Holloway, the designer and mind behind The Great Hunger. We've gotten our sculptors in from Bestiarum Games, from Creature Caster, and from Fotis Mint Studio. Eric Scaziel is our concept artist. He's ridiculously talented. Everything about this is just something I'm so excited to show more of. If you're interested, you can go over and sign up to be notified on my mini factory when this thing goes live, and you'll get some free Wretched for your trouble. And they're awesome, might I add. So please enjoy the video. A brief and likely inaccurate timeline of the Carcass front. 968. First fortifications raised in the Syrian Gate, which will eventually become the Baghras Fortress. 1099. The Knights Templar commit the act of ultimate heresy. The Gate of Hell appears on Earth, and Jerusalem is destroyed in the Cataclysm. 1103. The traitor Templars are dragged from Baghras and beheaded, their skulls built into towers to forever bear witness to what their weakness unleashed. 1272. After profaning both heaven and hell, the city of Nineveh Novus is burned from above and below for 72 days. 1346. The Black Grail is unleashed upon the world. The House of Pillars is the only site where the plagues of Beelzebub are thwarted. 1532. A single assassin returns to Baghdad with the stolen secret of orichalcum steel. 1539. The Saif Allah, the Sword of God, is completed, but wrathful of the deceit of his Alchemagy, the Sultan hands the great gun over to Antioch. 1565. The exiled prophet Nostradamus arrives at the court of the Holy Roman Emperor, Rudolph II of the Habsburgs, and convinces him to begin construction of a site for flying machines that will become known as Rudolph's Folly. 1612. An unnatural storm blows in from the east and erases Rudolph's Folly entirely. 1625. As relations sour between New Antioch and the Sultanate, the alchemists and sappers maintaining the Sword of God are withdrawn, and the gun falls silent. 1683. Paladin Garen fights his way down through the Inferno to the gates of Dis, to discover why the heretic legions are collecting the fateful dead. His findings lead to the establishment of the Demetrian Order of Reclamation. 1729. Following unsubstantiated rumors of Sultanate expansion, the pilgrimage of stone begins, as 500,000 pilgrims march to Mount Nemrut. 1731. The pilgrimage of stone ends with the raising of the 12 on Curd Da. 1809. Construction of the Domus Demetrius completed for the processing of the fateful dead. 1821. The fall of Golav in Eire. Warrior priest Cormac MacNea is taken prisoner and tortured for 10 years, finally renouncing his faith to become War Priest Charon. 1865. The Heraclean earthquake devastates the Anatolian Hellfront, the Levant, and North Africa. The town of Dorathal is saved by the miracle of the wave. 1871. Heretic submarine congregant of Mammon discovered drifting off the coast near Alexandretta. Its entire crew slaughtered. 1872. The fall of Rijeka. Strange flying machines are seen in the skies, and by means unknown halt the construct hordes of Elagos. The Church decrees them angels of the Lord. 1888. War priest Charon's fleets ravage the Mediterranean in search of Leviathan's resting place. 1894. The year of the Broken Trinity. A massive heretic armoured spearhead is destroyed on the shores of Lake Antioch, creating the steel necropolis. Amid the wreckage, it is reported, are unusual flying machines bearing antiquated Habsburg heraldry. 1904. Black Bartolomeo emerges from lost Avignon, black with demon blood and ash. 1905. The Papal Relief Fleet is sunk by heretic submarines and washes ashore, creating what becomes known as the Carrion Coast. The communicant Never-Know takes up his vigil at the Pillar of Jonah, flushed with the holy flesh of the consumed Pope Leo XIII. Black Bartolomeo receives a vision of Leviathan, becoming blessed Bartolomeo. 1909. The risen and 30,000 trench pilgrims of the Lazarean Ascension recapture Baghras Fortress from the heretic legions. They refuse all entreaties for them to leave. 1913. Blessed Bartolomeo arrives at the House of Pillars in search of the prophecies of Leviathan. He later burns the monastery to the ground. War priest Charon completes the cosmological circles within the Gnostics' Ophite diagrams, divining Leviathan's resting place. Of the great passes that allow passage over the Amanus Mountains, none is more vital than the Syrian Gate. Whoever controls this pass dictates the course of the war for the Levant, so it is no wonder that so much blood has been shed attempting to hold it over the centuries. The warriors of Persia, Macedon, and Rome have all fought to control it, and some say that when the stars are in strange alignment, the sound of clashing steel and cries in unknown languages echo from the rocky sides of the pass. The prescribed writings of Aristotle tell that in the wake of the Battle of Issus, whilst Alexander the Great and his bodyguards pursued Darius and his fleeing host into the pass, they came upon a depthless ravine filled with the bloodless corpses of 10,000 Persians. Who or what had slaughtered them so foully was never discovered, and all who saw the hideous sight never spoke of it again. Not until 968 AD, by which date such tales had long been dismissed as hyperbole by the ancient philosopher, were the first permanent fortifications raised. Though initially little more than a fortified watchtower, it quickly grew in strength and scale, becoming the last refuge of the disgraced Templar Knights who had loosed hell upon the world. When the heretic knights were finally dragged out, they were beheaded and their skulls mortared into the castle's highest tower, facing the Jerusalem Hellgate, to forever bear witness to what their heresy had unleashed. In the centuries since, the fortress has seen countless sieges and been rebuilt numerous times by heretics and faithful alike, with great walls of dark stone and towers now spanning the entire width of the pass. Though reconsecrated after each expulsion of heretic forces, some stains are impossible to entirely remove, and many stationed within the bleak fastness speak of it as a lodestone for slaughter, a cursed place that draws death like moths to flame. Most dismiss such fearful speculation, correctly noting that mountain passes have always been sites of fierce battles. Nevertheless, it is impossible to deny the ghastly chill that settles in the heart when walking the ramparts of Baghras at night, or to ignore the keening lamentations heard when the wind blows cold. The last siege was in 1909, when 30,000 trench pilgrims, under the banner of a previously unknown war prophet known only as the Risen, stormed Baghras in a single, overwhelming assault. Upon the raising of the cross, vast pyres were set throughout the fortress as the heretic corpses were burned, and the smoke was said to be visible from the iron wall itself. When Duke Constantine XI of New Antioch dispatched Lord Mortimer of the Knights Pursuivant and 5,000 soldiers to take over the defence of the fortress, they found the gates barred against them. An emissary of the Risen claimed Baghras for the pilgrims of the Lazarene Ascension, and warned that any attempt to dislodge them would be regarded as an act of heresy. Having expected the fortress to be surrendered, and without a siege train, Lord Mortimer had little choice but to withdraw. Since then, Baghras has remained under the control of the Risen, who refuse all entreaties from New Antioch, yet staunchly defends its walls against the heretic legions. Agents of the Church have sought in vain to discover the Risen's true identity, and thus Duke Constantine is faced with the unpalatable prospect of a vital flank held by an ally of unknown provenance who obeys no orders but those that he claims come from the Lord of Heaven. In the northern reaches of the Guillemé Gap sits the ancient settlement of Zenkerli, a city that has endured thanks to its prominent location at the mouth of the Amanus Gates. It was here that the Sufi mystic Jalal al-Din Muhammad Rumi founded his renowned teaching monastery, the Bit Hilani. Known as the House of Pillars, it was where intellectuals, poets, artists, and fellow mystics would gather to debate matters of the temporal world and the nature of the kingdoms divine and infernal. The records of their debates and insights were incomparable, and the libraries of their wisdom were consulted by the world's foremost academics and theologians. Even in the face of hell's assault on earth, Rumi and those who came after him never faltered in the belief that humanity should seek knowledge of Tawhid, a oneness with God, which was lived most fully through love. This philosophy was put to its ultimate test when Beelzebub unleashed the Black Grail upon the world in 1346, and plagues beyond number ravaged the earth for centuries. Tens of thousands were dying every day, but as the mystics of Zenkerli recited Rumi's core mantra, that flame which, when it blazes up, burns away everything except the everlasting beloved, a great silver wall of fire sprang up around the city. Despite the vile pestilence that ravaged the globe, the people of Zenkerli were spared thanks to their mentor's teachings. The Prince of Decay could not let such an affront go unchallenged, and the Order of the Fly was eventually dispatched to raise the House of Pillars and slay all within. Yet even the mightiest of his followers could not cross the silver flames, but in the wake of the Corpse Wars, a numberless horde of pox-ridden hounds, thralls, and other foul beings obeyed a mournful summons to muster in the Anatolian hellfront. There, they formed a dirgeful host led by the despairing plague knights who had served Yersinia Rex prior to his destruction. Shunned even by their own kind, the fallen knights sought only destruction and vengeance for their lost master. This putrescent host of hate-filled plague knights led their horde to the flame-ringed Zenkerli, and the city was now defended by a pilgrim procession of anchorites drawn by prophecies of eternal battle. The fighting around Zenkerli was said to have lasted a full year, and by its conclusion, both the plague host and the anchorite processional were all but wiped out. The city had been obliterated, and although the House of Pillars remained, the wall of silver flames had finally been extinguished. This, perhaps, was Beelzebub's greatest victory, for within that divine fire lay, according to those few mystics who survived, a means of defeating the Black Grail. Perhaps that was once true, perhaps not, but in the centuries since, none of the scattered mystics who followed Rumi's teachings have been able to recreate what their ancient forebears were able to achieve through Tawhid. In the centuries since, the House of Pillars has fallen into disrepair, its glory days long past, and its holy founder all but forgotten. When a procession of the Sacred Affliction led by a zealot named Blessed Bartolomeo arrived at the House of Pillars in 1913, the few remaining mystics could only watch in horror as he tore their libraries apart in search of something he named the Prophecies of Leviathan. When Bartolomeo emerged, he ordered his followers to set the House of Pillars aflame, burning all records of what he discovered and turning hundreds of years of wisdom to ash. Leaving the destroyed monastery, Bartolomeo led his pilgrims deeper into the Carcass front, where he proclaimed that he would confront Leviathan and slay it in the name of Almighty God, no matter the cost. Word of Bartolomeo's crusade had reached the ears of the Synod and New Antioch's bishop, and though his proclamations are publicly dismissed, some within the church fear there may be some truth to his visions and have privately begun investigations into what he might have learned in the ruins of the House of Pillars. Long has the Iron Sultanate been famed for the power of its artillery, from infantry jezails and midfa fire lances, all the way to the mighty basilic bombards mounted on the iron wall itself. The Alchemagi ceaselessly work alongside the Jabirian alchemists and metallurgists from the foundry of watered steel, to craft ever more lethal weapons to obliterate the followers of the Great Shaitan. By comparison, the artillery of New Antioch is considered functional at best. Mass-produced cannons churned out in unclean factories without the blessings of the Creator of the universe placed upon them. That such weapons function at all is considered a minor miracle by the Alchemagi. Following the discovery of orichalcum steel in the 16th century, the Alchemagi petitioned the Sultan to pursue closer relations with Antioch, for they much desired access to its alchemical formulae. The Sultan refused, believing that the church would demand too much in return, so the Alchemagi made secret pacts with the assassins of Alamut to steal the secret orichalcum from the fortress monastery at Velarad. Only one of the secret knives returned, but their prize allowed the Alchemagi to craft a cannon of terrible power, one they proudly named Seif Allah, the Sword of God. Not only was it a fearsome weapon of destruction, it was also a thing of beauty. Its mighty barrel rippled with the water patterns of Damascus, bound by the inlaid silver filigree of Musalian artists, and inlaid with the seals of Solomon in golden calligraphy. The Alchemagi proudly unveiled the Sword of God, believing they would be richly rewarded for their efforts. But the Sultan was angered at their disobedience, and decreed that the weapon would be presented to the Duke of Antioch as recompense for the theft of orichalcum's secrets. 100 lions of Jabir dragged the mighty weapon to Antioch with an escort of the Sultan's own janissaries, where the Duke received the weapon with great humility and gratitude. The high clerics of the church, however, balked at employing a weapon crafted by artisans of a rival faith, and decreed that the weapon could not be set amid the anchorite battle shrines of the city's walls. Thus, the Duke commanded that the Sword of God be taken west, to the Gulf of Alexandretta, where it was set upon a firing plinth above Port Bonnell. Despite the church's reservations, the Sword of God proved its worth over the years, destroying the heretic warships Blood Harvest and Noctifer, then sinking the capital ship Belphegor. For over 200 years, the weapon was maintained and improved with developing technologies by emissaries from the House of Wisdom, eventually being set on newly developed heavy-gauge rail tracks running between its original plinth and the Pillar of Jonah, to better defend the coast against the heretic navy. But as relations soured between the rulers of New Antioch and the Sultanate, its engineers were withdrawn, and without their specialized knowledge, the Sword of God fell into disuse and disrepair. Numerous pilgrim cults have sprung up around the gun, some praying it will turn its wrath upon the enemies of God once again, others seeking to topple it as a blasphemous idol. In the decades since its abandonment, the Sword of God has changed hands between these warring cults many times, and naval raiders from the heretic sea fortress of Gibraltar have sought to capture it 6 times. Even though the faithful can no longer fire the gun, it is still defended, as the thought of it falling into the hands of Tartarus' smiths is too terrible to countenance. Storms have since buried the Sword of God, but it remains inviolate beneath the sands, ready to deliver death to the forces of Gehenna once more. The reign of the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II was one of great volatility, with the erratic monarch accused of instigating needless wars and delving into prescribed occult sciences. His castle was a menagerie of arcane devices, outlandish hybrids purchased from Mendelus labs, and Taquin beasts procured from the House of Wisdom. His most notorious act followed the arrival of the exiled prophet Nostradamus in 1565. The astrologer wove a tale of machines able to soar the skies on man-made wings, so the young emperor tasked his military engineers to build a complex whereby such machines could take to the air and return to terra firma. This base was built in the foothills of the Sumava Mountains, and consisted of great stretches of flat stonework and enormous structures to house the skycraft. Inventors came from all across the world to craft the machines that the emperor desired, but none could fly for more than a few seconds. As the complex grew ever more elaborate, it almost bankrupted the House of Habsburg, becoming known as Rudolph's Folly, before a great and terrible storm from the east erased it from existence in 1612. Only centuries later, in 1872, when the port city of Rijeka came under attack from the construct hordes of Elagos, was its existence recalled. With that city's fall, a storm blew out of the Sumava Mountains, and the droning sound of powerful engines filled the skies. Hundreds of winged shapes were seen moving through the clouds towards the front, and the southern horizon lit up with fiery bombardments. When the storm abated, the heretic advance had been blunted long enough for the faithful to muster strength enough to hold the line. Church leaders proclaimed a miracle, decreeing that the winged shapes glimpsed high in the clouds were angels sent by the Lord. But reports from towns and villages near where Rudolph's Folly once stood spoke of airmen wearing archaic clothing and outlandish machines that could take to the air. When church officials investigated these claims, they found no sign of any such men or machines. 22 years later, a clue emerged when the air fleets bombarding the heretic armoured column advancing through the Galeam Gap found themselves aided by craft bearing antiquated Habsburg heraldry. Field agents of the church, directed by observers of the synod, discovered a hitherto unknown airfield in a secluded valley near Targovista, and dispatched soldiers to secure it. When the regiments arrived, they found no trace of an airfield, only the faint echo of engines and the fading reek of diesel fumes. In the years since, rumours of this mysterious airbase have spread throughout the Levant, with no rhyme or reason discerning in its appearances and disappearances. In the current year of the Lord, scattered reports claim that unsanctioned aircraft or airships have been sighted operating out of the northern Amamis Mountains. but the veracity of this is unconfirmed. Just as mysterious as the airfield itself is who leads these sky pirates. Some speak of a disaffected noble of Lower Silesia, known as the Bloody Baron, while others claim he is not an individual, but a title passed from one commander to another. Yet others speak of a Mendeless being crafted by Rudolph II himself, who was sworn to fulfill the vanished emperor's belief in Nostradamus' prophecy. Whoever leads these flyers, one thing is clear: they are a law unto themselves. For they raid settlements, ground convoys, and supply airships belonging to the nobles of Europa for ducats and supplies. Such actions merit death and excommunication, but too many of the faithful have been saved from disaster when the Baron's flying machines dive from the clouds to lay waste to heretics for the Church to pursue this with any great vigour. One of the highest peaks of the Taurus Mountains, located south of Trebizond and within one of the northwestern re-entrants of the Iron Wall, is Mount Nemrut. Its peak has been a place of pilgrimage since lost antiquity, with a host of towering statues built atop its summit. The identities of those depicted there have long since been lost, but the fact that the Iron Wall goes out of its way to exclude the mountain is seen by many in the church as proof that they were once Christian saints. As such, the mountain remained a site of pilgrimage for many of the most hardline pilgrim processionals, who risked everything to cross hundreds of miles of shell-cratered wasteland, corpse-choked rivers, and furious battlefields to reach their destination. That the vast majority of such pilgrimages ended in death never deterred others from undertaking this near-suicidal pilgrimage. In 1729, when unsubstantiated rumours of the expansion to the Iron Wall that would bring the mountain within the bounds of the Sultanate reached New Antioch, a mania unlike anything since the fall of Byzantium gripped the Levant. Nearly 500,000 pilgrims converged on New Antioch before beginning the long march toward the sacred mountain to save the statues. They went barefoot and brought no machinery or vehicles, arguing that those who had first placed the great statues had none. By the time they reached the mountains, a third of their number were dead, but their fervour had only increased. Despite the enduring heretic assaults day and night, their faith never wavered, and when finally they reached the summit, the immense task of moving the titanic statues began. Without mechanized equipment, the labour was Herculean, near impossible, but the power of faith and their strength of thousands proved enough. The pilgrims bore the unimaginable weight of the statues from the summit down the rocky slopes of the mountain, 12 statues in an echo of the 12 disciples. Thus began the pilgrimage of stone, the statues borne on the backs of thousands of pilgrims across the nightmarish landscape between them and New Antioch. Many months and miles passed, with hundreds of pilgrims martyred every day on their death march through the wilderness of razor wire, shellfire, and relentless attacks from heretics. The suffering only increased their zeal, but when the ragged procession finally reached the banks of the wide Orontes River, they found that all of the bridges had been shelled into oblivion. A single pilgrim cried out that by his flesh he would offer passage and dived from the bank, and soon a flock of joyous pilgrims followed his example. The first were swept away, but as hundreds then thousands waded into the water, the endless stream of bodies slowly dammed the river until a bulwark of fully 10,000 souls choked its flow and allowed the remaining pilgrims to cross into fateful territory. By the time the pilgrims reached the wall of Chiros, over 400,000 had died, but their long march was not yet done, for they now ascended the nearby mountain of Kurda. There they set all 12 of the great statues upon the summit overlooking the plain of Antioch, and then, their holy task complete, the pilgrims lay down and died. In the centuries since, The statues have witnessed the waxing and waning of the war against hell, and the mountain summit has seen some of the bitterest fighting of the Great War. For it is said that should the Pilgrims of Stone, as the statues have come to be known, fall, then so too shall the earth follow in their doom. The year of the Broken Trinity saw total war unleashed upon the Levant, and though the faithful were able to stave off disaster, it was only at terrible cost. Holding the Levant was critical to the world's survival, and understanding that it was wiser to fight hell far from their own shores, the Papal States spent years constructing an immense convoy fleet and assembling vast stockpiles of war materials. The convoy launched amid a great ceremony, and its flagship, Immaculata, was captained by the Supreme Pontiff, Pope Leo XIII. Himself aided by his communicant bodyguard, may he never know the touch of neither blade nor bullet. The sheer scale of the resupply efforts had not gone unnoticed, however, and no sooner had the convoy set sail than it came under attack from the heretic wolf packs. Under Leo XIII's bold command, the convoy successfully fought its way eastwards, fending off every attack until passing the Cyprian Gate. Thus far, raids had come from surface ships, but scores of heretic submarines lay in wait just off the Alexandretta coastline. Hundreds of Hag torpedoes struck the convoy, sinking dozens of ships in the first moments. Yet more followed, and the slaughter was unimaginable. Within the hour, every vessel in the fleet had been sunk or crippled, with the survivors gunned down as they clung to the burning wreckage. Immaculata was captured by naval raiders, and the Pope taken prisoner aboard the submarine Leviathan. The shattered remains of the papal fleet washed up along the northern coast around Alexandretta, creating a graveyard of wrecked ships that became known as the Carrion Coast. After 3 days and 3 nights, the crippled Leviathan surfaced north of Alexandretta at the Pillar of Jonah, an abandoned airship lighthouse of the Aeronautica Pontifica. Just before it sank to its final doom, a gigantic figure disembarked, clad in the blood-soaked remains of papal vestments stitched together in a crude cassock. He bore a colossal recoilless anti-submarine gun ripped from the deck of the Leviathan across one broad shoulder and marched through the surge tide of wrecks to the shore. For this was may he never know the touch of neither blade nor bullet, the only survivor of the Immaculata. His teeth were red with holy blood, for he had, under instructions from Leo XIII, devoured his master to prevent the heretics from torturing him, or worse, twisting him to the cause of evil. The holy flesh of the Pope melded with the divine blood of the communicant to fuse them into a singular being of immense power and schizophrenic piety, a being who now went by the name Never Know. He had fought his way free of captivity and slaughtered the crew of Leviathan, his mind afire with the clamour of the heavenly choir and all too mortal thoughts of the consumed Pope. Never Know climbed the Pillar of Jonah and repaired its beacon, before beginning his lonely vigil, watching over the sacred remains of his lost fleet. Having already elected a new pope, the Holy Curia no longer considered Leo XIII the supreme pontiff, but as his essence lived on in the flesh of a sacred communicant, they were unable to completely forsake what Never Know had become. So the Aeronautica Pontifica sends regular airships laden with the supplies needed to keep the lighthouse functional, as well as the meagre necessities required to maintain the communicant's body. Though nearly a decade has passed since the destruction of the supply fleet, Never Know still vigorously defends the beacon, using ordnance provided by the Papal States to lace the lands around his lighthouse with lethal traps and his modified anti-material rifle to destroy any who approach without the proper obeisances and catechisms.